the same thing. Now, this view, which one often hears expounded by laymen or college sophomores, is frankly just rooted in ignorance of what the world's great religions teach. Anybody who has studied comparative religion knows that the worldviews propounded by the world's great religions are often diametrically opposed to one another. Just take, for example, Islam and Buddhism. Their worldviews have almost nothing in common. Islam believes that there is a personal God who created the world and is omnipotent, omniscient, and holy. It believes that man is sinful and in need of God's forgiveness, that everlasting heaven or hell awaits us after death, and that we must earn our salvation by faith and righteous deeds. Buddhism denies all of these things. For the classical Buddhist, ultimate reality is impersonal. The world is uncreated. There is no enduring self. Life's ultimate goal is not salvation or personal immortality, but annihilation. And the ideas of sin and salvation simply play no role at all in Buddhist religion. And examples like this could be easily multiplied. Now, clearly, all of these religions cannot be true, for they have contradictory views about the nature of ultimate reality, the world, man, moral values, salvation, and so on. They could all be false. But they cannot all be true. And therefore, unsophisticated religious pluralism, I think, is simply untenable. So what the sophisticated religious pluralist says is that all of the world's religions are, in fact, false. None of them is true. They are all culturally relative ways of misconstruing reality. Ultimate reality, which you cannot accurately call God, should be given some nondescript name like the real or the absolute, and nothing can be known about it. Nevertheless, all of the world's religions picture the real or the absolute in different ways. Though all of them are literally false, nevertheless, all of the world's great religions are effective in transforming people's lives. Now, sophisticated religious pluralism raises a host of questions, but I want to focus this evening on just one. Why think that religious pluralism is true? That is to say, why can't just one particular religion be true? What's wrong with religious particularism? Specifically, what's wrong with Christian particularism? Well, some of the objections offered by religious pluralists, when you examine them, are just obvious logical fallacies. For example, pluralists often say that it's arrogant and immoral to claim that any one particular religion is true. But this type of reasoning seems to be a textbook example of the logical fallacy which philosophers call argument ad hominem. That is to say, trying to invalidate a position by attacking the character of the people who hold to it. And this is clearly a fallacious means of arguing. To illustrate, imagine some medical researcher who finally hits upon a successful AIDS vaccine. Moreover, let's suppose that this guy is a total jerk. He brags about his discovery. He boasts about his brilliance. He looks down at his colleagues as mental midgets compared to him because they didn't discover the vaccine. He says he ought to be awarded the Nobel Prize in medicine for his discovery because he is the only one in all the world who discovered the true AIDS vaccine. He's totally arrogant and immoral. Now, does his arrogance and immorality do anything logically to undermine the truth of the claim that he has discovered a successful AIDS vaccine. More particularly, if you were suffering from the HIV virus, would you refuse to take this vaccine because the person who discovered it is arrogant or immoral? Well, obviously not. The efficacy of his vaccine, the truth of his claim to have discovered an AIDS vaccine, is completely independent of the character of the person who holds it. And in exactly the same way, it's irrelevant to the truth of a particular religious claim whether or not its adherents are arrogant or not. But in any case, why think that religious particularists are arrogant? Suppose that I've done my best to figure out the truth about God. Suppose I've diligently read the scriptures of the various world's great religions. Suppose I've looked at the arguments and the evidence for each one. Suppose I've talked to the adherents of these various religions and sought to understand their views and why they believe them. Suppose I've sought God earnestly in prayer and meditation and other religious and devotional exercises. And suppose at the end of my search, I'm convinced that Christianity is true. Well, what else can I do but believe in it? I think it's true. How can I help myself but believe in it if it seems to be true to me? It seems to me that I have no other recourse than to believe what seems to me to be true. And therefore it seems to me that it's simply false to say that anyone who holds to a particular religion is ipso facto arrogant or immoral. That simply doesn't follow. But a final irony of this objection is that it turns out to be a double-edged sword. For if it is arrogant and immoral to hold to a religious belief which is rejected by most other people and which implies that their religious beliefs are false, then it follows immediately that the religious pluralist himself is arrogant and immoral. For remember what sophisticated religious pluralism holds. The religious pluralist believes that everybody else's religious beliefs are false, that the religious pluralist alone has seen the truth. Only religious pluralists, who after all are a tiny minority of mankind, are right, and everybody else is wrong. I mean, how arrogant can you get? Well, another bad argument against religious particularism is that people's religious beliefs are culturally relative. For example, the pluralist points out that if you had been born in Pakistan, you would likely have been a Muslim. But if you'd been born in Ireland, then the chances are that you would have been at least nominally a Catholic. And therefore, the religious pluralist concludes none of these particular religious beliefs can be true. Well, again, this argument seems to be just a textbook example of the logical fallacy which philosophers call the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is trying to invalidate a view by showing how a person came to hold that view. And such a move is, again, just obviously fallacious. For example, if you had been born in ancient Greece, then you would likely have believed that the sun goes around the earth, and maybe even that the earth is flat. But does that therefore mean that your belief that the earth goes around the sun or that the earth is spherical is therefore false or unjustified? Well, obviously not. So that this argument is also simply logically fallacious. And also this argument, too, turns out to be a double-edged sword. For if the religious pluralist had been born in Pakistan or Ireland, then he would likely have been a religious particularist. And therefore, by his own argument, it follows that religious pluralism is false. His believing in it is just the result of his being born in late 20th century politically correct Western society. Now, please don't think that because such fallacious arguments are often given on behalf of religious pluralism, that pluralism does not pose a serious challenge to Christian belief. On the contrary, I think it does pose a serious problem. But by clearing away these fallacious arguments, we can get to the real problem which is lurking in the background. That problem, I'm convinced, concerns the fate of unbelievers who lie outside of one's own particular religious tradition. This problem is especially poignant for Christians who believe that salvation from sin and eternal life are to be found only through Christ's atoning death on the cross. Given the universality of sin and the uniqueness of Christ's sacrificial, substitutionary death on our behalf, it follows that salvation is to be found only through Christ. But religious pluralists find this simply uncommon.